Hello. Buenos días a todos. Qué gusto volver a estar aquí y compartir con una comunidad de profesionales que tenemos la misma pasión por el oficio de la arquitectura, el diseño, y que saben que en sus manos está no solo el futuro urbano de nuestra ciudad, sino el presente de una capital que está madurando día a día y ahora el mundo lo sabe. Hoy está con nosotros uno de los grandes representantes de la arquitectura mundial, un arquitecto que con un pensamiento visionario ha dejado su marca alrededor del planeta, y Quito a partir de hoy no será una excepción. ¿Y por qué decidimos en Uribe Schwarzkopf buscar a Moshe Safdie para crear un nuevo proyecto? Porque estamos en la búsqueda constante del desarrollo de un Quito con un nuevo perfil. Un perfil que se complementa y que evoluciona priorizando al ser humano, generando interrelación con la comunidad y respetando el espacio, la naturaleza, la sostenibilidad y la sustentabilidad en cada metro cuadrado construido. Esta alianza estratégica que nos hizo trabajar en equipo con Safdie Architects no solo se consolidó por conformar el mayor y mejor hub de arquitectos en Sudamérica, sino porque estamos firmemente convencidos de que trabajar con los mejores nos permite crecer, porque todos estamos en un constante aprendizaje. Perdamos el miedo a ver más allá de nuestras fronteras, a conocer y aprender de los mejores. Hoy todos nosotros, los presentes y la nueva generación de visionarios, nos encontramos frente al llamado de construir juntos el futuro de Quito. Con ustedes, Moshe Safdie. Muchas gracias.
Pocos creadores se mantienen vigentes con el paso del tiempo. El arquitecto Moshe Safdie es una de estas excepciones.
I think the principles that have guided our housing work are the notion of indoor and outdoor living, the idea that a house should have an outdoor space as well as indoor space.
Ya en 1967, su singular visión de la arquitectura le otorgó prestigio mundial. Con solo 26 años, Safdie logró revolucionar el concepto de un edificio de vivienda.
Habitat would be all about gardens, contact with nature, streets instead of corridors.
Su destacada trayectoria lo llevó a ser profesor de arquitectura y director del posgrado de diseño urbano en la prestigiosa Universidad de Harvard. Más de 100 proyectos y 5 décadas han pasado desde aquellos inicios, llenas de lecciones sobre urbanismo, paisajismo y diseño.
It's basically about light, it's about sun, it's about nature.
Tanto en los espacios públicos como en los residenciales, encontramos el signo de una arquitectura humana que involucra emocionalmente a las personas.
People prefer to live in a building that gives some sense of community.
So it's all about rethinking and proposing a new kind of public realm.
Muchos de sus proyectos se han convertido en íconos nacionales, como el Museo del Holocausto en Jerusalén y el Instituto de la Paz en Estados Unidos. Sitios cargados de un intenso dramatismo arquitectónico, acentuado por el sorprendente tratamiento de la luz. Su obra ha sido prolífica, especialmente en Singapur, donde en los últimos años ha diseñado los edificios más emblemáticos, entre ellos su aeropuerto y el ícono de Singapur, el Marina Bay.
In Singapore, we had an opportunity. There are outdoor spaces and indoor spaces, and you move from one to the other, and there is contact with nature at every level of the structure public gardens and open space.
Ahora Safdie llega a Quito con un atrevido edificio, cuyos jardines y volúmenes se nos hacen conocidos, como una idea sacada de la memoria colectiva gracias a su oficio y elegancia.
Guess I don't have to give my lecture anymore. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted that we have come together with Uribe Schwarzkopf to design a building for Quito. It is an exciting place, and we're looking forward to realizing the project. I wanted to talk today about some of the principles and ideas that have guided our work over the past decades. And I want to concentrate on two themes, because I think both are particularly relevant to architects practicing in the world today. And in some ways, you could see this also as somewhat criticism of where some of the emphases in architecture are actually being invested today. What I'd like to talk about, first of all, is the humanizing of megascale. Quito is a case study, not the most extreme, but a city which is growing rapidly, where the high-rise building is becoming the basic building block of the city. And that is happening worldwide with extraordinary densities and extraordinary concentration. And I think you could say unequivocally that the quality of life reduces or goes down as the density increases. There is very little planning today trying to cluster tall buildings in a rational way that improves the quality of life. So, how to humanize megascale is one of the journeys that we have been exploring, which I will get to in a moment. But I also want to talk about the impact of globalization and the increased sameness of architecture everywhere you go at this point. It used to be that places had unique character, the vernacular architecture, the materials, the traditions, the culture. The old city of Quito is a rich architectural heritage, and so on and so forth as you travel. Today, increasingly, international architecture, and particularly high-density architecture, seems to follow some universal formula, and architects are quite content to parachute their signature style, not all of them, but many of them, no matter where they build. So we have been really interested in this whole question of belonging, how to create an architecture that feels part of a place, something which is integral part of the culture and lifestyle. So I will take you back chronologically. I want to go back to 1959. Like some of you here today, I was a student in my final year at university, and I got a scholarship to study housing in North America. The prevailing wisdom of the time was the works and writings of Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and the whole modern movement. And this comes straight out of the Le Corbusier, La Ville Radieuse, Towers in the Park. There were many versions of this. This is the Ideal City, 1923, by Hilverseimer. And the concept of ideal city seemed to be sameness, some strange kind of equality, and the notion that towers set in open space will form the ideal city. We visited many public housing projects built in the 40s and 50s and 60s. This is one of the famous Cabrini Green public housing in Chicago. It was demolished 10 years ago, but the similarity to Hilbersheimer's ideal city is uncanny. We also, realized as we traveled the United States and Canada, that anybody who had a choice was choosing to live in the suburbs in a small little house in its own little lot. And I was impressed with the contrast between the choice of house and the imposition of an apartment. When I came back, I decided for my thesis to try and demonstrate that we can rethink apartment buildings from scratch. The idea was that we would prefabricate houses, we would assemble them in an open spatial matrix. We would do so every house has a garden on the roof of the unit below. You see here the assembly of the units, and you see the project as it is today. Streets serving the units, each house open in 3 or 4 directions, a garden for every house, playgrounds, and public and communal spaces. 50 years later, this has proven, first of all, to be a very desirable place to live. It has gentrified, but one question that it poses is, why did it not proliferate? Next. So I go fast forward. In recent years, we have been working in many mega cities in Asia, in China, in Singapore. Next. This is an example of what we come upon. This happens to be Hong Kong. I could have shown Shanghai. Indeed, I was in Shanghai and Beijing in 1973, and there wasn't a single high-rise building, not one. Today, Shanghai and Beijing are very much like this. This is a closer-to-home example in Sao Paulo, and that's not Sao Paulo today, that's Sao Paulo 15 years ago. No, go back, please, you're going too fast. Can I not do this? Let's try again. Okay, forward. What you see here is the low-rise fabric of Sao Paulo spreading as it is imposed upon by the high-rise typology. And because of the absence of a plan, because of the absence of any guides to accommodate tall buildings, it simply eats into the fabric like a kind of a cancer until it replaces the old fabric. Next. So a few years ago, we decided in the office to revisit the concept of habitat, to see whether we could address these bigger densities. Could we still demonstrate the ability to get light and air and nature and open space in densities which are maybe 15, 20, 30 times what they were in the Habitat 67 example? So a year later, we called it the storage place for all the study models. We looked at hundreds of possibilities, and we ended up developing, you're going too fast for me, I'll do this with my finger. Go back, please, sorry. So we ended up actually developing a number of different systems for different densities and different economic frameworks. This tried to take the idea of habitat and make it more economical. Keep the structure vertical, keep the plumbing running vertical. Next. Go to a prefabricated system, which is panelized systems. Next. As you see here. and yet still maintain the quality of life and terraces and gardens, etc. Next. Here we developed some housing membranes which are able to span from elevator core to elevator core. The concept here was that you provide open space within the platforms, and then each resident can design their own dwelling within it. And another variation on that. The most interesting study was to try and take one particular place, and we took central Midtown New York, and we mapped the density of housing and offices and retail that are in there. And we then explored the idea of developing a system that can meet these same densities in a different way. So you see on the left, Manhattan today, the red is offices, the blue is residential, there's retail, the yellow, and on the right you see this rearrangement, stacking offices and on top of it apartments, creating streets on the 25th level and on the 50th level, matching the density of Manhattan. And so here you see in the model, and there are two principles to this that we thought were relevant. First, can you design high-density clusters of towers without creating a wall? If you build this along a park, or if you build this along a river, can you make the massing porous? And you see these large urban windows through which you see the city and which light allows through. Also, by putting the office buildings lower and the residential buildings above them, we maximize the light quality that's appropriate to each one of them. Next. Next. And you see this porosity of the building, which seems to be so important, notwithstanding the density. Next. In the past 10, 15 years, some of these ideas have now found themselves into reality. In Qingguangdao in China, a middle-income project of beachfront development is now occupied. This is the model. You can see the development behind it, and the city was very eager to have a project that would not block everybody behind it from the view of the city, of the sea. Next. This is the completed project. Now we are building the second phase, and we were very pleased that we could achieve this quality of life for middle-income housing. Next. Also middle-income housing in Singapore. Next. A complex of 600 apartments with high level of community facilities, playgrounds on 3 levels, bridging between the structures, a lot of community space, gardens, terraces, and balconies for every apartment. We stay very close to these projects, and we monitor the quality of life and the response of residents and the level of satisfaction that, and how the buildings actually work in terms of daily life when they are 10 and 15 years old, and more than that. Next. Next. A very interesting challenge came in Colombo, where, next please, where there is not yet the tradition of very tall buildings, and we try to create a building that has that sense of the very particular tropical climate of Sri Lanka, overlooking the sea. And here we actually leaned one building against the other, forming a membrane of terraces climbing up towards the sky. Here's the almost completed building, which will open in a few months. One of the subsidiary issues which is of great concern today as density increases is the change and loss of the public realm. It used to be in the traditional cities, and in that sense, Quito is still a traditional city, where there is still a rich street life and piazzas and the ability to aggregate within the city in public spaces. But as the density increases, you are getting more and more a kind of privatization of the public realm. In many cities, mega malls, many of them, not one, many mega malls are developed, sometimes occupying 2 or 3 city blocks with 2 or 3 towers on top of them, or 4 or whatever. These podium buildings are completely introvert. The real estate concept is get you in and trap you. Thank you. Get you in and trap you. The less contact with the street, the better. This is not accidental. It's part of a concept that you privatize a space, you devote it to one particular use, which is retail. You mix it with other uses to get the density, and then, because they don't connect to each other, slowly street life starts to suffer. And one of our interests has been to tackle these mixed-use projects and to try and find a way to make the public realm, or the private public realm, truly part of the city. Next. So our first opportunity, this is just a typical Asian mixed-use project. It's probably 2 million square feet of retail, probably on several levels, I'm guessing, but that's the formula. This one has 2 or 3 towers, sometimes they have 6 or 7, and you can see that they're surrounded by a ring of roads which don't look very inviting for pedestrians. And it is a microcosm, exclusive microcosm of city, and if you go around Shanghai or Hong Kong, you will see that there are scores of those, and slowly they become the center of public life. So when Marina Bay Sands was first proposed for Singapore and we were asked to design it, I saw there an opportunity to take a project which was almost 8 million square feet, 800,000 square meters, and show that you could have this mixed use and create truly public spaces that are part of the city. I also had the help of the Singapore URA, Urban Redevelopment Authority, who was very strongly behind the idea of making the public realm alive and vital again. Next. So this is a photograph of the completed project. It is based on a requirement of the government that there should be a lively promenade along the bay, the waterfront, which connects to the whole ring of other spaces along the water. And the program of hotels, convention, theaters, museums, shopping, and casino, in this particular case, had to be put together on this rather restricted site, landfill site. Next. And so I started thinking, how can we make this be like a city? In other words, how to give it the structure of a city. The client first thought that the shopping should be in the middle, the same formula, surrounded by other uses. And this is a plan of Byzantine Jerusalem, where you can see that, like all Roman cities, it has the Cardo Maximus in the center. It is the main avenue of public life. Plugged into it are the different public buildings, and then you have the fabric of the city. So it's a hierarchical, spinal approach. Next. So what we proposed is take the promenade, which is along the water, what's on the left, green. Take the idea of the Cardo Maximus, which is the main commercial life, integrate them into a singular space, which is both outdoor, indoor, partially air-conditioned, partially part of nature. Let life migrate from the outside to the inside. Do not create an exclusive air-conditioned place. Make it part of the life of the city. And rather than make it internal, connect each end of it to the surrounding city streets so that it becomes part of the fabric of movement in the city. Next. So this is the promenade running along the bay with the air-conditioned shopping spaces next to it on the left. Next. This is what happens on this promenade at night or other times where there are festivals, performances. There's a museum that you see at the background, which is part of the public spaces. There are 2 theaters. Next. This is the more air-conditioned, more traditional shopping space, but it's full of daylight and it connects to the surrounding streets, so it's anything but internalized. Next. And even the atria which run through the hotels are designed as 24-hour, open to the public spaces, which connects to that network, rather than as isolated lobbies. The buildings also are heavily planted as they rise from the surrounding park. And then every roof in this project, including the roof of the towers, is dedicated to public outdoor space and parks and gardens. What we call the Sky Park, and for those of you who have not seen the movie Crazy Rich Asians, there's particular exciting footage of in it. I don't know if it's arrived here yet. The Sky Park is 2 hectares of parks, swimming pools, restaurants, public observatory. And it really extends public life up to the 59th floor. Overlooking the city. Next. 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 The Museum of Art Science was also a requirement to have an iconic building on the promenade that represents the spirit of Singapore. And since Singapore has museums and aquariums and concert halls, we want to invent something new. And so we had proposed a Museum of Art Science, combining art and science together in a building that has very diverse exhibit spaces for a whole kind of new type of experience. The corner tower next, which we're already seen in the film, is in the lineage of the residential projects that we have done, but it is also, as I see it, specific to Quito, specific to the corner, hence the name. That was not my invention, the name. And also, it tries to build upon the incredibly gentle climate of Quito, where you can really have indoor-outdoor living in the most relaxed and extreme way. Next. Next. And in a sense, it's quite a simple gesture of taking the extruded mass, it's a very small lot, and then pushing the units in and out in such a way that they all end up with outdoor spaces. Next. As you can see here. And since we only have 4 apartments maximum per floor, then each and every unit has 2 directions of light, some of them 3, and all of them have outdoor spaces. And then they come down to the street in a way that's responsible to street life with shops and lobbies and community spaces. Next. And the integration of plant life into the architecture has become something so fundamental and central because it completely transformed the nature of outdoor spaces and roofs when they are actually cultivated. We are doing a project now in Singapore where we have lots of roofs on commercial buildings, and all of that has been developed now as community agriculture. And the very notion that the community can do urban farming on unused roofs not only provides clearly sustainability and agriculture and so on, but it just changes the spirit of how you feel about your community, which is in the middle of the city and yet has the ability to grow food and have an agricultural activity in it. Next. Next. And when I say indoor-outdoor life, we have terraces, but we're also opening them up dramatically. These are sliders that open at the corner, so that when you are in the unit, this outdoor space and indoor space is experienced as a singularity. And as I said earlier, it does give you the illusion of having more space than you really are paying for. Next. Next. So I want to go to the second theme, which is how you make buildings belong, how the challenge of making buildings part of the culture and respond to the culture. And again, I want to take you on a personal journey. After I designed Habitat, I was commissioned to do all kinds of residential complexes in different cities. Some got built, some didn't. But in 1970, I went back to Jerusalem. I say back because I was born in Israel, but had lived in Canada. And I was commissioned to do a number of projects in Jerusalem. This is the old city. You see the Western Wall, the mosques, the wall of the city. And one of my first assignments was to restore part of the old city called the Jewish Quarter, and also to build a number of public buildings in it, but later on to do a number of other buildings. The British, who controlled Jerusalem between 1918 and 1948, were very responsible about preserving cultural heritage. They legislated, for example, that all buildings in Jerusalem must be built with Jerusalem stone, so that the buildings would harmonize with the historic buildings rather than use any kind of modern material. And so Jerusalem evolved very different, for example, to the city of Tel Aviv, which is a white city, modernistic city, which would be more familiar. Next. So in the center there is a rabbinical college, which is within the city walls, which was one of the first buildings in which I was trying to deploy stone and create a scale and rhythm of architecture that was harmonious with the old city fabric. Next. Outside the wall, a college, the Hebrew Union College, we explored how to integrate planting and plant life and courtyards at different levels into the architecture, and how to use stone, traditionally, combined with concrete and aluminum and modern materials, and still get this vocabulary of architecture that feels part of the historic city. The most difficult project and challenging project was to rebuild the Mamilla district, which is the area within the center of this image, fronting the wall of the old city. Because this was the border for 19 years between the Jordanian and Israeli parts of the cities, it became a complete slum. And the challenge of rebuilding it and the debate about it was, could you do a commercial project which would take on the fabric and character of the old city, or should nothing be done there because you cannot do modern buildings which harmonize with the historic fabric? Next. This is the project today, complex. It took 30 years to complete. It has housing, hotels, parking for the old city, residential development, some institutional buildings, historic buildings which we kept and preserved, and it has become now the center of public life of Jerusalem. Next. Here we look from the city wall outbound. The large garages needed to serve the old city are landscaped in a way that they're completely part of the biblical landscape. And you can see the apartments and the streets and the alleys that extend. Next. And a big debate with developers who insisted that here you had to do an air-conditioned mall. And we insisted with the city that this is the place to do open-air, real public realm street, pedestrian streets, which would take on the same character as the souks of the old city. And it's nice to report that this proved to be a great commercial success. Not architectural success, but commercial success. Next. And you can see here the streets with the shops along them, pedestrian streets, and the apartments on top, mixed use in the real sense of the word. Next. In Jerusalem, I'm going to show you three institutions, all in very different locations, very different subject matters. And the emphasis is to demonstrate how the nature of the program and the character of the place inform the design to result in something that's quite unique to that particular project. And the first one I will show is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, but I'll do so in a sequence. In 1976, I was asked to design a memorial for the children who died in the Holocaust. And the request was to actually design a museum with different objects, letters, things that the archive of Yad Vashem had that related to children. This was to complement the historic museum, which was already there. And I felt after many months of work that to do yet another informative museum would not work. People would be saturated with information. They would have come out of the historic museum and information would not be taken in. So I tried to do a place of reflection and meditation. So I proposed to go underground through this natural cave that's on the site and to descend into an underground space. Next. You come into an anteroom which just has reflections of images of children who had perished in the Holocaust. And then you move on to a larger hall, next, where there is a single candle in the center. And through an arrangement of semi-reflective walls and mirrors, that candle reflects into millions of candles. And you walk through, and there is a voice that reads the names of the children, and eventually, next, you come out on the other side of the mountain to light and to life. The building committee was shocked at the proposal, and they said people will misunderstand, they'll think they're in a discotheque, and kids will misbehave, and they shelved the design. It was in 1986, 10 years later, that a donor, a banker who survived Auschwitz but lost his son there, came to Yad Vashem, saw the maquette, he had it explained to him, and insisted they build it, wrote the check, and then 10 years later, it was realized. Next. A few years later, next, while I was on one of my trips to Jerusalem, I had a call from the foreign ministry saying that the chief minister of the state of Punjab is visiting, and he was taken to the Children's Memorial in Yad Vashem, as heads of state often are, and he wants to meet the architect. So I traveled to his hotel, and he was there with his team, and he said he was very deeply moved by the Children's Memorial. And the Sikhs are about to build the National Museum of their history in the Punjab, near the capital, Chandigarh, and he would like me to come and design it. So those of you who are in the profession know that we don't get jobs like that very often. You know, competitions, interviews, another competition, another interview. But 2 weeks later, I was in the Punjab, next. I was first taken to Amritsar, to the holiest temple of the Sikhs. And I started learning about their traditions and their philosophy and their religion. But of course, it was a looming threat. And I call it threat because it was. As soon as I arrived, all the local architects and scholars were up in arms. What is this Israeli, American, Canadian, Israeli Jew know about Sikhism, and why are you importing an architect to do our most important national building? And I realized that unless the design really resonates and clicks and does something to the Sikhs who are experiencing it, it would have been failed. And in that sense, this question that rose in Jerusalem really became real here. Next. They took me to a sacred, holy town near the capital, where the last guru wrote the scriptures of the Sikhs, and said, we're going to build it here, next. But they had a very distant site, and I suggested that they should adopt this site, and what you see here, the two hills on either sides of the valley, which would be walking distance from the town. And sure enough, that was acquired, and we began working. This was one of the images in my mind about the power of fortress architecture in India. This actually is in Rajasthan, but the Sikh tradition is very much intertwined with fortress architecture. Next. And these were the early sketches that I made of the museum, where the building is built with concrete and sandstone rising out of the sand cliffs on either sides of the valley. And I brought back this wood model showing that the valley would be made into a water garden in the Sikh tradition. And there would be two parts to the museum, the library and the auditorium on the city side, and a pedestrian bridge crossing over to the historic museum on the opposite side. Next. And so there was a groundbreaking when I came back a few months later, and 500,000 people showed up. Next. And the site had been cleared. Next. And while I was still designing in Boston, the bridge was built. The pedestrian bridge has been built. So it shows you the kind of inertia and enthusiasm. Next. The finished building as it is today, and I'm compressing 10 years, not easy to build in India. Next. But the total integration of the landscape, the building forms, the traditional materials with modern materials. They call this the flower building, and each petal tells the story of one of the first 5 gurus. And this is when you come from the side of the north, where the fortress-like quality of the building is most expressed. And the exhibits were made by craftsmen from all over India. Rather than go high-tech with all films and all that, they really drew on the whole tradition of craftsmanship. And you see the public moving through it, where the exhibits and the public are almost one. Next. Next. And view from the old temple to the museum. I'm showing you this in a particular sequence because it's after I completed this that Yad Vashem decided to totally rebuild the historic museum in Jerusalem. And this is the hill where the Children's Memorial is, but also you can see here the historic museum as it was before we started. It was a very small museum. It had been designed when Yad Vashem would receive 300,000 people a year. Now they had a traffic of 3 million, and the material available was much greater. And yet I felt uncomfortable about building a big building on top of this very beautiful pastoral hill. And I started thinking in terms of cutting through the mountain, building the building underground. Next. You can see in that sketch, you come in at one end on the left, you cut into the mountain, the museum is under the mountain, and you come out on the other side to the light. Next. I thought that the gallery should not be rooms, like architecture business as usual, but almost this is a quarry in Spain, a stone quarry, almost like excavated in the natural rock, almost like archaeology. And that there would be kind of a anti or non-architecture in the character. Eventually, we built the building as a prism that cuts through the mountain. The elements you see in the landscape, which is now grown full, are skylights that bring light into the museum underground. You can see in the plan, you enter at the bottom, and you move through, and you go back and forth from room to room until you emerge on the left to the mountainscape of the city. Next. You come into a structure that is just a service structure where you can leave your coats and servicing. It has soft light. It kind of prepares you for the transition. You then, next, cross a bridge, kind of a shaky bridge, and you enter the prism at one end of the mountain. Next. The light comes from above as you move through. And while you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you can't get there because there are cuts in the floor. Next. And so there are exhibits cut in the floor which force you to go from chapter to chapter, from room to room. Next. The entire building is concrete. No other material, glass and concrete. I had to get special permission to allow me to do a non-stone building in Jerusalem because, as I said earlier, the regulations are that you build with stone. I thought stone was too pretty and, in a sense, ordinary. Next. And then you start moving through the chambers with the exhibits where the black and white photographs merge into the concrete. Next. Light coming from above. The floor gets deeper and deeper into the mountain as you go through, and then it starts rising. And it strikes me as you go through the kind of thin line between spectator and exhibit. As you come towards the end, there is the Hall of Names. You see here a cross-section through the model. There's an excavation into the rock, natural rock, and there's a cone that rises towards the sunlight. Next. The cone itself has photographs taken from the 3 million files of known victims. And the excavation into the rock is in memory of the 3 million names that will never be known. Next. Looking up to the light. Next. Looking into the bedrock and the water table and the reflections. And then you emerge to light. Life prevailed. We are here, the force is out there, and there's a kind of a whole decompression of what is not an easy experience. and the arms of the structure cantilever outwards. A very contrasting example of a building in nature, a Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, Middle America, I would call it. It is where Walmart, does Walmart come? Is Walmart in Quito, in Ecuador? Walmart is a mega retail, some of you might have heard about. And in that town, I was asked by one of Alice Walton, the daughter of the founder, to create a Museum of American Art which should truly be a place of community. And again, I was asking myself, how do I make a museum in, I don't want to call it the middle of nowhere because the people of Arkansas will be hurt, but certainly not a vital urban place, and make it feel like part of the nature in which it is set. And I propose that we build in the valley, at the bottom of the valley, where the waterbed is, where the stream of water is coming through. And of course, this becomes powerful when there are rains. But that's the way the stream was before we started. And to build there like the old mill towns, right by the water. Next. And the proposal was that we build 2 dams and hold the water and create ponds. And around those ponds, we would build a museum. That's first sketch showing how the museum clusters itself around the water. Next. And that's the finished building. The ponds, completely part of the ecology. The floodwaters flowing under when there are floods, and they come. And the entire building is built with concrete and local wood. Next. The bridges across the water are designed as bridges, the buildings. There are cables that span from side to side, supporting the wood structure. Within them are galleries. Next. So you see it here, the dam below, the bridges above, the water streaming through. Next. The entry as you descend from the top of the hill. Next. And then the public spaces and the galleries. These are all laminated wood beams spanning from cable to cable. And as you move through, you're experiencing art and landscape, nature and art. Next. Then galleries are set within those structures with very soft, beautiful light. Next. Natural, soft daylight. Next. Contemporary galleries. And so on you move. And next. And each time that there's the opportunity to bring the natural environment from outside, it comes right through and into the building. And so again, you get an architecture that's very particular to this program and to this place. Next. Next. So I'd like, in conclusion, to come back to maybe the most fundamental question of all, which is what drives us as architects. And I'd say, first of all, what must drive us first deeply is a sense of responsibility of the humanity which we serve. I often say in classes, in schools of architecture, if you can get yourself, every time you take a pencil, to think of those who will experience or live or work in your building, think of them as if it's you when you're designing, it's halfway to victory. But there's also the question of the kind of generating force of architecture. What inspires me the most, I'm asked that question quite often, particularly by journalists, and they expect me to give them a list of all the buildings and architects that have inspired me. What inspires me the most when I'm designing is to think of design in nature. This is the wing structure of a dove, and you can see this extraordinary, beautiful lattice of bone, very efficient three-dimensional lattice, which is nature's way of evolving to a great structural solution. And yet for us, it's also a subject of great beauty. Next. I mean, the same of the Nautilus Shell, which is a logarithmic growth pattern trying to have the body and the house grow at the same pace. I'm fascinated how natural organisms transform through the seasons, and often wonder why can't we get architecture to transform equally dramatically through the seasons. And so on and so forth, just the extraordinary efficiency and beauty and geometry of everything we observe from both the natural and inert world. And so this brings us to the essence of beauty. Many years ago, I wrote a poem which I think summarizes very elegantly much of what I've been saying today. And I know, I'm sorry I don't have a Spanish translation, which would have been nice to be able to recite it in Spanish, but I'll give it a try anyhow in English. He who seeks truth shall find beauty. He who seeks beauty shall find vanity. He who seeks order shall find gratification. He who seeks gratification shall be disappointed. He who considers himself the servant of his fellow beings shall find the joy of self-expression. He who seeks self-expression shall fall into the pit of arrogance. Arrogance is incompatible with nature. Through nature, the nature of the universe, and the nature of man, we shall seek truth. If we seek truth, we shall find beauty. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, profesor. A continuación vamos a realizar unas preguntas del público. Vamos a seleccionar 3 preguntas solamente en honor al tiempo y por la agenda. Por favor, quien desea realizar la primera pregunta, les acercaremos un micrófono para que la realice. Aquí, por favor, levanta. Sí, hay traducción.
Moshe, muchísimas gracias por esta charla tan increíble y por compartirnos toda la experiencia de tus proyectos. Bueno, en realidad tengo 2 preguntas. La primera es, ¿cuál ha sido el reto más grande que has tenido como arquitecto en tu carrera? Y la segunda es, ¿a dónde crees que va la arquitectura de nuestra ciudad en los próximos 5 a 10 años? Gracias.
As easy as this sounds, every project has its impossible challenge. Some more than others, but if I think of half a dozen challenges, Habitat 67, my first building, we never built a building before. I had an office of 20-year-olds, was a challenge. It was breaking technology right all over the place. Building Mamilla in Jerusalem against the Greens, against the archaeologists, against the Orthodox, taking 30 years to build it, that was a challenge. So there are many projects which almost seem impossible, and then there's the miracle, we get them done. Quito is an easy one so far. There was another half a question, part of it.
¿Quién más, por favor, levante la mano? Por ese lado, por favor. Ay. Ah.
Okay.
Ah.
Buenos días, arquitecto, y a los presentes. Y primero, agradecerle por su charla. Segundo, agradecerle por lo que nos habló acerca de arquitectura y construcción sostenible, que es algo que está muy de moda hoy. Yo le quería hacer una pregunta. Usted, a nosotros como arquitectos e ingenieros civiles jóvenes, que somos la mayoría de los que estamos aquí, nos recomendaría que podamos impulsar esto consiguiendo, por ejemplo, maestrías en ciudades inteligentes, maestrías en ciudades sostenibles. ¿Cree que desde su experiencia en el mercado de Quito, en el mercado de Ecuador, esto puede tener un futuro que usted nos recomiende para nosotros? Gracias.
I think I would answer your question a little differently to your question. I don't have a master, I have a Bachelor of Architecture. But after I graduated, I thought that city design or urban design was really important. So I worked at it. Years later, one became aware that energy and resources are central, and that sustainable design is going to be very important in terms of responsible architecture. And so, if you've got the curiosity, the knowledge and information is there. So I would say what's important is to define what really is critical to the making of architecture, and then following through curiosity. Whether you get a degree or not, that's a second matter. And that leads me to a question that I didn't completely answer, which is where are cities going to? Cities are getting denser. Cities are going to have to start thinking of planning in three-dimensional terms. We're not far from the time where there will be zoning from 0 to 20, zoning from 20 to 40, different zoning. There'll be connectivity requirements. There'll be daylight requirements. We designed a project in Qingwandao that I showed you on the beach. The bylaw there says that every apartment must have 3 hours of sunlight every day measured in the winter solstice. It took us 6 months of playing with our computer and massing and models to solve that. That's where I think cities should go. And the other thing I will say is the biggest change coming is first it will be cars on demand, not owning the car, but having it on demand, like the bicycles. And second, the driverless car. And that is going to totally transform cities, and I don't even have a clue how far and how much of a change that will be.
¿Alguna siguiente pregunta?
Acá. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Alex Narváez. Nos ha conversado acerca de la importancia de la identidad a través de la ciudad y de la arquitectura. En el edificio Corner, ¿cómo pretende su arquitectura, la plástica y la concepción del edificio construir esa nueva identidad para la ciudad?
I think identity in the city is a subtle issue. Let me go back to Habitat 67, the first project I showed. You can't tell one house from the other. They're all boxes. But what you can tell is that there are many houses. It's like when you go to a Greek town or Italian hill town. You can't say, so-and-so lives here, somebody else lives there. But you surely know that this is a community of many families, each living in their own space. And I think the corner project tells you that. It's not an extrusion like one block. It is made of a complex fabric of a village. Later on, when people live there, somebody will have a red curtain, and somebody will have a yellow umbrella, and somebody will have something else, and then the patina of life will increase that identity.
Bueno, si alguien más quisiera hacer una última pregunta, que levante la mano, ¿sí?
Thank you, Professor, for being here and giving us this lecture. I have just a little question. If you think about becoming a resident of this corner building, you may concern about all the comfort issues. As an acoustician that I am, I would like to emphasize the low and mid-frequency reflection that traffic noise will generate over the facade. How do you absorb all this strong sound energy that will reflect under these balconies?
I didn't get the question, I'm sorry. Did you get it? Try Spanish and I'll put that on.
Mejor. ¿Cómo se pretende absorber esta gran cantidad de energía sonora que el ruido de tráfico y las actividades que ocurren dentro de estas grandes avenidas? ¿Cómo se pretende absorber todas estas reflexiones que van a estar debajo de los balcones?
I got the question. First of all, living in the city is a noisy place. It's a real issue because I noticed now, for example, in New York, some of the new hotels open their windows. The new fashion is you're allowed to open your window. And you open your window in New York, if you live in the middle of the city, between the ambulances and all the other noise of garbage removal at 5 in the morning, you close a window and turn the air conditioning on. And it's a real dilemma. I think we improve this if we can have more absorption in our buildings. But that's not easy to achieve. In terms of corner, it's hardly a very noisy place. You got the park on one side. What we've done is the first 4 floors, which are the noisiest, are community spaces where you're more tolerant. You have the club room, you have the gym, etc. The apartments start above that. By the 5th level, now I do hope that people in corner will open the windows. Even in the bedrooms, we've given them Juliet windows, floor to ceiling, open completely with a railing. I think Juliet windows come from the Shakespeare play where they were singing out from the window. That's where the term comes from. So we might, have somebody on the street and singing to the Juliet window. So I do hope they open the windows and tolerate a little bit of noise. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Muchas gracias, profesor Safdie, y muy buenas tardes.